Louisville completes the season sweep over Virginia, prompting the question, will the Cardinals finally land back in the top 25?
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this special Sunday edition of the Locked On the Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my fifth year covering the University of Louisville, third year hosting this show, and I want to take the time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the show is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Today's episode of the show brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. All you have to do, visit FanDuel.com to get started. Louisville completes the season sweep over Virginia after defeating the Cavaliers 81-67 on Saturday at the KFC Yum Center. It was a back-and-forth game for the first part of the first half, and then Louisville was able to get out to a lead, and they did not end up looking back. After completing the season sweep and going 2-0 last week, the question now becomes, is this the week in which Louisville will finally land back in the top 25? I believe so. I'll explain why coming up shortly, and then we'll sort of discuss the current state of ACC basketball heading into the back half of January. Where does Louisville sit? What does their path look like to get a top 4 seed and a double bye in the ACC tournament? Who are the top contenders to go up against? And much, much more. So a lot of basketball talk on the show today. It begins with the Virginia victory. The Cardinals complete the season sweep after defeating the Cavaliers 70-50 at John Paul Jones Arena. In the beginning part of January, they answered up with an 81-67 victory over Virginia at the KFC Yum Center on Saturday. This is the first time since the Cardinals have joined the ACC in which they have completed a season sweep. In fact, they had only defeated Virginia 2 times prior to this season. They defeated Virginia back in, 2015 when Mango Mathiang hit the game winner, and 2020, the COVID season, when Jordan Nwora and company played really well at home against Virginia. But obviously, the Cavaliers had been the team's kryptonite ever since the two squads started playing games in the 20th century. So to be able to compete the season sweep, look, I know that this Virginia team is not that great. I mean, Louisville came into this game as like a 15.5-point favorite. That's wild. That's incredible. Like, I remember thinking to myself, we had talked in the last episode that the spread wasn't out. I figured it was going to be around 8 to 9 points. No. Try doubling that number. You're anywhere from 15.5 to 16.5. Even without Noah Waterman, the line didn't really change all that much. And I mean, I guess that's, number one, a testament to how bad Virginia is playing coming into this matchup, losing the last 4 games, starting with the Louisville game back in January. The Cavaliers have not won a single game in the 2025 calendar year at this moment. And Louisville, knock on wood, the other hand, they have not lost a single game. Virginia hasn't won, Louisville hasn't lost. So 2 completely polarizingly different trajectories from both of these teams. Louisville opens up as a huge favorite against the Cavaliers. And I'm thinking to myself, Virginia likes to make things messy. I hope that this team doesn't fall asleep at the wheel. And Louisville really didn't. I mean, for the most part, the first half, they exited with an 11-point halftime lead. And it probably could have been more. There were a couple calls that I was like, okay, that's kind of tough to call in that situation. And there's other situations when you look back to the first matchup against Virginia, to where the Cardinals could have pushed the lead out more, but you had some turnovers, you had some tough shot selections, and it prevented you from putting this game out of reach. Now, it was different in the fact that the margin was a little bit higher. Like, Louisville was playing with more of a lead in this first half than they did in the first half down in Charlottesville. So able to kind of go back and forth and going into halftime with an 11-point lead. They opened things up in the second half, more the same from the first 20 minutes. They got out and moved in transition. They defended well. They ended up pushing the lead to 20 points. It was 55-35 going into the under 12 timeout. And then Virginia kind of made things a little bit interesting. Looking at that, I'm going back to the play-by-play game script for timing references. It was 55-35 when Abubakar Traore had the layup to go to the under 12 timeout. And then Virginia opens up on a quick 7-0 run that spanned just over a minute. So, they cut the lead to 13. And I'm thinking to myself, oh boy, here we go. And they got the lead down to 11 when Elijah Saunders made a three with 8:31 to go. And then, like they've done so many times this season, Louisville was able to close out the basketball game in the last 8 minutes or so of the game. Defense was much better. Like I said, guys just continued to step up. You look at the performance overall, not really much to dissect in the grand scheme of things. When you're supposed to beat a team by as much as Louisville was, beating the team by double digits is expected. Now, you take the full context of this game, and a win over Virginia is there's more satisfaction in that for Louisville fans than, let's say, a win over insert random conference team here. I'm like a win over Virginia Tech, or I don't know, you can insert a name here, Syracuse. Beating Virginia, it's just you've lost to them so many times since joining the ACC, and the way in which you've lost some of those games was just brutal and heartbreaking. I don't have to bring any to your attention because you already know which losses I'm talking about. Just frustrating games. So being able to win those games, it never gets old. Even if Virginia isn't a great team by any metric, you still were able to win both games by double digits, which no matter how good Louisville's been in the past, they have not been able to say that. So Virginia now 8-10, 1-6 in conference play. Louisville 14-5, 7-1. Chucky Hepburn, rough day at the office for the Cardinals point guard. 2 of 13 from the field, 0 of 4 from the 3-point line, had 8 points. The good thing beyond that is that the other 4 starters all scored in double figures, leading by Reyne Smith. Reyne, 19 points, had 4 field goals, all from the 3-point line. He was 7 of 7 from the free throw line. He also had 4 rebounds. James Scott, 12 points, 10 rebound, double-double. Terrence Oglesby of the ACC Network tweeted out, James Scott isn't getting the credit that he deserves, and that is correct because he's playing better and better. We had a segment on this, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? I think it was last week, where he's just becoming more comfortable in his role. He's playing much better defense on the interior, and really can't begin to state how important he's been during this winning streak. Javon Hadley, 13 points. Terrence Edwards, 6 of 13 from the field. He was 0 of 5 from the 3-point line. Got hurt in the game in the second half. It looked like he might have bumped knees with somebody on a screen because Virginia was just getting away with multiple moving screens. Now, one got called, and I was absolutely shocked that happened because we've seen how many times Virginia gets away with it. But he had 16 points, 6 rebounds for the Cardinals. Traore and Roots, 7 points and 5 points, respectively, off the bench. And Frank Ansel-Mibe with 1 point and 3 rebounds. So the Cardinals didn't shoot the ball that well, 26% from the 3-point line, 43% from the field, but they were 23 of 27 from the free throw line for 85%. And that is much, much better considering how they looked against Pittsburgh and against North Carolina. They went 11 of 11 from the charity stripe against Syracuse, and now 23 of 27 against Virginia. So that's really nice to see. The Cardinals have won the last 8 games on this winning streak. Multiple players have stepped up. Virginia actually didn't shoot the ball all that badly. 47% from the field, 38% from the 3-point line. They were about 58% from the free throw line, which hurt them. The Cardinals out-rebounded Virginia by 6. The margin was even more than that up until the end of the game. Virginia turned the ball over 15 times. So Louisville scored 20 points off of those turnovers for Virginia. So, again, just continuing to be better and better. And then Louisville only 7 turnovers in this game. So the Cardinals did what they needed to do. I don't want to take any grand takeaways from this game because there's really not, other than just handling business against a team that you were supposed to. And this week was completely different from the week prior. The week prior was like, okay, let's see just how good you are. And then this week it was sort of, yeah, we're seeing how good you are, but it's not beating teams that would be a toss-up game. It's handling business against teams that you're supposed to beat. And Louisville was able to do so. And I know that we talked about raising the floor and the ceiling with beating teams like Pittsburgh and North Carolina and Clemson, but you also have to beat the teams you're supposed to beat and eliminate the opportunity or possibility for any bad losses to sort of plague your tournament resume. So Louisville going 2-0 in the week in which they were favored to beat teams pretty decently coming in. So the main question now, Louisville on the 8-game winning streak, currently at 14-5 overall. Will the Cardinals finally land in the top 25? Personally, for me, I think that answer is yes. We'll explain why when we come back on this special Sunday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. This message is brought to you by Prize Picks, the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or regular season, Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all the football action. Now it's playoff time. There's no better way to get in on the action with Prize Picks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least 2 players, and if your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. For me, I'm all about the hot takes this season. This week, I'm looking at Lamar Jackson for more than 250 passing yards tonight against the Bills. Also had Travis Kelce for more than 70 receiving yards against the Texans. So with the app, you can get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. Ready to run your game this football season? Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. Prize Picks. Run your game. The conversation has already started to happen and happen frequently. After Louisville's win, really last week, it started to be discussed. But after going 2-0 this week, and now being at 14-5, the conversation has kicked off. Will Louisville land in the top 25? That's the question everyone wants to know, or everyone obviously in the fan base. When was last time Louisville was in the top 25? If you don't know off the top of your head, well, I'll tell you. The 2020-2021 season when Louisville had Carlik Jones and David Johnson back on January 25th of 2021, the Louisville Cardinals checked in at 25th in the AP Top 25 rankings. They ended up losing, I think it was the next game to Clemson, it was like 54-50. And since then, the Cardinals have not been back in the top 25. Coming into the week, Louisville was 5th in receiving votes. Just on the outside looking in, you could call them, 30th overall in the AP rankings. Since then, 22 of the 29 teams ahead of Louisville have lost this week. Shout out to Kelly Dickey on Twitter for being able to point that out. 22 of the 29. Now, that number is significant, but it's not the telltale sign, because if any team is in the top 15 and they lose, I mean, they're not going to drop out at the top 25. It's unlikely. So I'm looking at that pocket of sort of 16 to 29. Right. I'm looking at 16 to 29, maybe even 17. So you look at that pocket. Number 16, Gonzaga, lost this week. Or I'm sorry, this past week. Number 18, Memphis lost. Number 20, Michigan. Number 21, Ole Miss. Number 22, Utah State. Number 23, Georgia. Number 25, Baylor. All of those teams in the back half of the AP Top 25 lost this past week. Just based upon that alone, I would imagine that the 5 teams prior, I mean, like you have what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams from 16 to 25 all lost. If you do the math, I mean, you would expect that maybe 5 teams drop out of the top 25 and 5 others rise up. But it also doesn't have to be 5, because you look at the other remaining votes, numbers 26 through 30. St. John's had the most receiving votes on the outside looking in. They did not lose this week. However, the other 3 teams ahead of the Cardinals did. Oklahoma had 63 votes. They lost. West Virginia had 61. They lost. Now, they did end up beating Iowa State, so you wonder, does the loss earlier in the week, does it get, sort of scratched out by West Virginia beating Iowa State, who was number 2 in the country? I'm not necessarily so sure. Arizona also lost. Yes, they were able to win a right game, but Arizona also lost. Illinois is currently playing. They are ranked 19th, and what is the score of that game as we speak? Michigan State is up 7 in the game with 5 minutes to go. So by the time this episode gets finished recording, by the time you listen to this, number 19 could have lost. So you have all the teams that lost ahead of the Cardinals in the top 25, and then the teams that were ahead in receiving votes. Oklahoma, West Virginia, Arizona, all lost. So by the process of elimination, you would imagine that, St. John's is probably going to get back into the top 25. But Louisville was one of the few teams in the conversation that did not lose a game. And I imagine, Texas Tech, Maryland, Clemson, like Louisville had 17 votes. What are the chances that they get jumped by multiple teams? Because I would imagine at least 3, maybe more teams end up falling down. Now, you could make the case that so many teams lost that teams aren't going to move a ton. Well, those teams on the fringe of the top 25 are definitely going to move down. So I don't think, we were talking about this before this week. You beat Clemson. You win on the road at Pittsburgh. You have a conversation to get back into the top 25, but there are no teams currently in the top 25 with 5 losses. Louisville would be the first team in the rankings with 5 losses. Now you have another week. I think that you're going to see a team with 5 losses make the AP top 25 for the first team this season. I don't think that these 2 wins do anything in the eyes of, the rankings. I mean, you won your games. That's really all that matters. Like, you're not proving, put it this way, it's like you don't get the same benefit of, beating Clemson, beating Pittsburgh, and the narrative, it's like, oh, look at Louisville. What I do think is, like, you have to shift that mentality to, like, Louisville beat 2 teams that they were supposed to beat, and they beat them both in blowout fashion. So despite the weekly schedule not being the greatest, you can't really fault this team, and they are proving and thus reiterating that, hey, look, we deserve to be in the top 25, and I think that is ultimately going to become the conversation. Now, in the coaches poll, Louisville was significantly further down than other teams, but the only thing that we really focus on is the AP poll at the moment. Oklahoma dropped out of the poll last week. They're not going to rise up more. West Virginia, same thing. UCLA also dropped out. So I would imagine that the teams in the the 20 to 25 corridor are in a real threat to move out of the rankings. It's just a matter of how many teams are going to rise up. And I think that Louisville is second in line to get back or to get into the rankings. So I do think that when Monday rolls around and we get those AP rankings, I think that Louisville will be in the rankings. Now, let's play the hypothetical that if they don't, I mean, grand scheme, it doesn't matter truthfully, other than, just momentum from a morale standpoint. You still have to handle business on the road in Dallas against SMU on Tuesday night. It's not going to be easy whether you're ranked or not. So just a heads up. But let's take a look at the current state of the ACC. Things are changing. Some teams are skidding. Some teams are rising up. Louisville is currently right there, tied for second place in the conference at 7-1 in ACC play, and they're getting closer and closer to that top four finish. But let's look at the other teams. Let's look at how else or what else needs to happen for Louisville to be able to land in the top four. We'll do that when we come back on the final segment of this Sunday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. For me, it's all about the FanDuel app. It's easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keep every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. All you have to do, visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com, and make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Into the final segment of this Sunday edition of the show, I want to take the time again to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the show is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. The ACC obviously has gotten a lot of, let's just call it, criticism all season. It's not as good as the SEC or Big 12, understandably so. But I think it's better than people give it credit for. Like, it's not like this conference where you just don't get tested. I think that the top half of the ACC has some opportunities to make some noise in March like they do every year, contrary to what people want to say. But right now, Louisville is currently at 7-1, tied with the Clemson Tigers for second in the conference. They hold the tiebreaker over Clemson with that win over them in January. Duke is a perfect 8-0. Wake Forest 6-1. Carolina and SMU are both 5-2. You have Florida State and Stanford at 4-3, and then other teams have 4, 5, 6, and 7 losses if you are the Miami Hurricanes. So a couple things of note. I think that Duke continues to be a buzzsaw. They're by far the best team in the conference as we speak. They have not lost since non-conference play. They've been blowing teams out left and right. Their last single-digit victory was against Notre Dame, and before that, it was against Auburn. Gosh, this team is just continuing to gel with Cooper Flagg. But I'm more interested to see. Basically, you have 3 spots to contend for in the top 4, with a couple teams contending for those. One thing that I will say, I think we will know a ton about Wake Forest at the end of this month. They're currently 14-4, 6-1 in conference play. They lost to Xavier, Florida, Texas A&M, and then Clemson was their lone conference loss. They're starting to get better and better. Like, yes, they haven't played the best teams in conference. Like, their conference wins right now: Boston College, Syracuse, NC State, Miami, Stanford, and Virginia Tech. Like, none against like the top teams, really. So, but we will know more about this team at the end of January, because they have to play North Carolina on Tuesday this upcoming weekend. They host Duke, and then they're at Louisville, not this Tuesday, but the next one. So the next 3 games will tell us a ton about how legit or not legit the Wake Forest Demon Deacons are. I've always been a fan of Steve Forbes as a coach. I think Hunter Salas is one of the best scorers in the conference, and then you pair him with Cam Hildreth and Trayvon Spillers. They have a nice big three in Winston-Salem, but I think that I'm still in the wait and see mode with Wake Forest, because when they play better teams, are they going to be able to continue to play as good as they are? And I think that the answer is going to be yes to an extent, but I don't think that they're as good as Louisville currently. I think Louisville is hands down at the moment the second best team in the conference, but you do have some contenders for the top four. I think Clemson is legit. Everything that I've watched them, people will say, well, Clemson isn't all that great. I mean, they're 15-4 and they're 7-1 in conference play. Like, since the Louisville game, they beat Florida State by 20, Georgia Tech by 11, and they won at Pittsburgh. I think Clemson's legit. I think that they're going to continue to win games. Looking at their schedule, it's not as challenging. Well, I think it's a little bit more challenging than Louisville. They have Duke, Carolina, at Florida State, at SMU. Chase Hunter, Ian Shefflin, this Clemson team, like that win against Clemson for Louisville is maybe the most key of the slate so far in the ACC. I think you have three other teams that are just lurking at the moment. They're sort of treading water, but they're right within striking distance. It begins with North Carolina, who is 5-2 in conference play. SMU is right there. North Carolina 12-7 had a challenging, brutal non-conference slate. SMU is 14-4. Louisville will get a chance to go to Dallas and make their week a little tougher if they were to beat them. That might be the only game currently at the moment in which Louisville isn't favored to win. So, going to be a key game for SMU. North Carolina, SMU are right there on the outside looking in. And then you also have Florida State. I know they lost to Clemson, but they're just playing better and better. They beat Pittsburgh. They beat Georgia Tech. I still think that the Seminoles are a dangerous team. You look at the four spots in the top four. You think that Duke has one of those right now on lock, which they probably do, barring something catastrophic for the Blue Devils. But three spots, I think, you talk about Stanford. Stanford's on the outside looking in. They're 12-6, 4-3 in conference play. They lost to Clemson by 14, Pittsburgh by 15, and Wake Forest by 13. So they did beat Carolina on the road, which was a good win. Until I see more from the Cardinal, I just can't put them in this conversation just yet. So you have essentially 6 teams competing for the other top 3 spots in the conference. I think Louisville and Clemson are, the second and third best teams respectively. It's going to be a matter of who's going to step up outside of that. I'm going to say it's North Carolina, man. I still think that the Tar Heels are going to continue to get better and better, which is going to make that win in early January for Louisville look better and better. So all this is a moot point if the Cardinals can just handle business and continue to handle business. But I feel like it is reasonable and justified to have a conversation about the rest of the top part of the conference, because you need to be able to. I know it's the first it's the first time in a couple of years in which we've had this conversation, because Louisville's been the doormat of the ACC. But it's really nice to be able to talk about where Louisville ranks in terms of the top part of the ACC. So 7-1 in conference play, 14-5 overall. Tough matchup coming up at SMU on Tuesday on the ACC Network, 9 o'clock tip-off in Dallas. Hopefully, we're talking about a 9-game winning streak when we come back. But that is going to wrap up this episode of the show. On Monday, we're going to talk about whether or not Louisville made the top 25. We'll have some women's basketball talk. They have a key matchup against Virginia Tech on Sunday. And we might dive into a weekly mailbag segment. But all that coming up on the Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. We'll see you then. Go Cards.